Senior Vice President for Airports, Passenger, Cargo, and Security, who will give us, Nick Careen, he will give us an update on what's happening with the IATA Travel Pass initiative. And then we will have a few comments from our Director General and CEO, Alexandre Juniac. And after that, we'll throw it open to the normal questions and answers via the chat function. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Nick, who has a brief presentation to talk you through the IATA Travel Pass Initiative developments. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. As Tony mentioned, give you a quick run through of where we are in terms of the travel pass, some of the challenges, some of the timelines we have before us, and then obviously we'll get into some questions specific to it as we move along. Next slide, please. So don't think it's a big surprise to anybody that anyone that looks at the media today, the situation is not improving. Travel restrictions actually are increasing and going in the opposite direction. So, eliminating the risk fully is not anywhere in the foreseeable future. However, once the virus is more under control, we need to learn to manage it more effectively so that we can safely resume more normal lives and activities, including travel. As testing capacity improve and as vaccination population grows, reestablishing the freedom of movement will be crucial to economic recovery. And so in order to do so, managing this information safely is critical. Next slide. So the travel pass, we believe, is an element of that, and it is a digital solution, and it's meant for governments to help reopen international borders, removing quarantine and aiding the aviation restart. In order to do so, they need to be confident that we are mitigating the risks of importation of COVID-19, and thus confidence in the verifiable credentials of the customer's COVID-19 status. The travel pass is a digital solution and that both travelers and governments will be able to trust. The travel pass moves existing paper processes to digital platforms. It has been built with data security in mind, with convenience in mind, and for verification being its top priority. It has been designed on global standards. It is meant to ensure the verification of the identity and the test and vaccine information. And it provides a platform for travelers to have their test and vaccine results in a secure place on their phones and shared with whom they wish during the travel journey. It's also important to note that this is an opportunity to reduce the risks of fraud. The number of fake COVID-19 tests and eventually vaccine results, if they are not digitized, is a huge area of concern, not only for us, but for governments and consumers alike. We are aware of the numerous amount of counterfeit test results which have cropped up over the last number of weeks in several countries around the world. Paper test results come not only in different formats and languages, but they can also be easily manipulated. Our agents need to follow extensive entry requirements and guidance and try to determine the authenticity of multiple non-standard test documents that passengers present to them. This leads to health check inefficiencies, errors, fraud. It's an increasing problem in the world and about to get worse. The existing paper and test vaccination certificates needs to be modernized and digitized. The IATA Travel Pass helps passengers easily and securely manage their travel in line with government requirements, the COVID-19 test and vaccine information. The pass itself, which we've briefed on before, just as a reminder, is based on 4 interoperable elements. It incorporates 4 open-sourced interoperators, which is important distinction, and it ultimately can become an end-to-end solution. It is basically a registry of entry requirements using thematic, and that I'll speak about that in a little bit. And registry of labs, test centers, and vaccination providers for the consumer. It also is a means for passengers to securely upload this information on their phones and share when appropriate. And lastly, a digital identity to verify the owner and the certificate. In terms of our travel pass timelines, we have run pilots in the month of December. We are now planning additional pilots with more functionality in the month of February with British Airways and Singapore Airlines. And then subsequent to that and the results of those pilots, we will be onboarding additional pilots and tests with most recently announced Qatar Airways, Emirates, and Etihad, and more to come. The go-live date for the first version, which I'll speak about, is March 1st, the beginning of March, and then ultimately the next iteration of it, as we implement additional functionality, will come in April. Speaking more specifically in terms of what the different releases would encompass, the first release in March will be available on the App Store and the Play Store, so both Android and Apple. An important distinction, it will have an SDK, which is in terms of airlines being able to implement this within their own app. So this will make it easier for consumers not have to download multiple apps on their phone. The itinerary will be imported from our departure control systems like Amadeus and others. It will allow for multi-segment itineraries. It will have the verification and reference implementations in place. Sharing of results will be set up, and the passenger will be able to check for requirements. In the second release, we will begin to add more functionality. So it will be able to update based on current itineraries. It will, meaning in the regular operations, it will be able to be update based on regulations. It will have the minors and dependents, as well as groups. It will be able to ingest other travel documents for potential domestic use and others where passports information is just not available or passports aren't in existence. It will be multilingual, and it will have some search functionalities added to it. Next slide. One area that's complete, which is a milestone reached just in the last week, the thematic portion of the 4 modules is done. So the requirements that are for all the countries around the world are currently being populated. It is there for customers to be able to validate what the requirements are moving forward, and eventually the tests, the type of tests, and are in line with the standards which have been developed by ICAO and the CAPSCA process. And it also has provisions for when vaccination requirements are clearer in terms of regulatory requirements as we move forward. We're not making this up on our own. While IATA has extensive expertise in this area and have been doing this for many, many years in terms of the reference just made in thematic and other products and functions that we serve the industry on behalf. However, given the criticality of this and the need for speed, but also the need to understand the requirements in a very, very fast-changing world, we have an advisory group set up, and the airlines that on the slide give you a good indication of not only the size and breadth of these airlines being important, but also the regional nature and the regional variations within this group, so that we can make sure that we have a full global perspective on what's required as we move forward. Our first meeting with that group took place last week, and we will continue to meet with them on a regular basis until we're completely satisfied with the product. In terms of the challenges that we're faced with, I don't think this is really required. I think we all understand what some of the challenges are, and I referred to some of them at the beginning. Digital certifications need to become a mandate. We can't continue to operate in the fashion that we have globally with paper. This is just not sustainable. It is wrought with fraud. It's also very cumbersome, manual processes, and in a world where faster movement, less queuing is required, and this should be the motivation to get moving on this. We do need a global framework for acceptable testing. It's urgently needed. We're seeing that on a daily basis as countries are starting to question other countries' testing capacities. We've seen multiple examples of that, perhaps the most recent one being in the Netherlands, targeting the UAE in terms of their testing capacity and questions around that. It's just we can't continue that way if we are hoping to move forward in a meaningful restart. We also need governments to implement the current standards on digital travel credential. This is in place already, and we need the governments to embrace it so that we can get the full advantages of not only the travel pass in terms of the health requirements, but also the travel pass in terms of the passenger facilitation movements that would come along with it, as well as the contactless potential that it enables. And ultimately, we need global standards around a smart vaccination certificate, which really comes down to the World Health Organization, who are meeting and are discussing it, but they need to move much faster than they are currently. So there we have it. It is a big project. It is a very significant project. It is a very important project, and we are moving at a rapid pace. We're in good shape. We've seen a lot of interest, but we still have a long way to go before we're out of the woods. And hopefully this particular product will help in that regard. And thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Nick. Great update there. We'll now turn it over to Alexandre, who will put the IATA Travel Pass in the context of some of the other initiatives that we are launching with government. So, Alexandre, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon from Geneva, everyone. The momentum that is building around this Travel Pass initiative provides some rare good news for the industry. These last weeks have seen governments impose even more severe travel restrictions in the face of new COVID variants, halting what little recovery in air travel had been occurring. We believe that the IATA Travel Pass will become a key tool in managing a safe and orderly restart of the industry. It's unclear when that will be, but we need to be well prepared when the epidemiological situation permits. Governments will be the ones making the decision on when to reopen borders, but we think that the aviation industry will be a valuable partner in the process. That's not unlike the partnership that exists between airlines and governments on safety. Governments are the regulators, but we work together successfully to the common goal of a safe global industry. Two of the most important developments that are happening simultaneously are the continuous improvement in testing technology and the growing number of people being vaccinated. In light of that, we are seeing some progress that could form the foundation for plans to reestablish global connectivity. These include, first, vaccinations. Most governments are pursuing a vaccination strategy that seeks to protect the healthcare workers and most vulnerable populations first. IATA supports reopening borders to travel when this has been achieved, as the greatest risk will have been mitigated. Second, vaccinated individuals. The Greek government last week proposed that vaccinated individuals should be immediately exempted from travel restrictions, including quarantine. IATA supports moves by governments, including Poland, Latvia, Lebanon, and the Seychelles, to implement this exemption. Third, testing. Many governments are implementing flexible testing regimes to facilitate travel, which IATA supports. Germany and the US, for example, accept PCR and antigen testing to safely manage the risks of travel. Fourth, crew. The ICAO card guidance recommends that crew be exempted from testing processes and restrictions that are designed for passengers. IATA supports crew health management protocols, such as regular testing and health checks at home bases. This can be combined with strict guidelines limiting interactions with the local community during crew layovers. The point is to enable airlines to manage the risks of COVID-19 and still be able to schedule crew to support operations. All of these considerations occur against the background of the multi-layered biosafety measures as recommended by ICAO CARD. This includes mask wearing and are being implemented globally. IATA supports such measures for all travelers until such time as the epidemiological situation allows for relaxation. If those are the principles to plan for a safe, orderly, and predictable restart, we also need some global standards around which to implement them. I'll highlight three in particular. Number one, vaccination certificates. WHO is leading efforts to build the standards needed to digitally record vaccination information. We see the smart vaccination certificate will be the digital successor of the long-established yellow book used to manage vaccinations, such as yellow fever. Number two, global framework for testing. The OECD is laying the foundation for a global framework to help governments trust testing data. It is based on mutual recognition of testing results. We recently saw the suspension of services between Denmark and the UAE because of concern over the UAE's testing regime. This shows how essential it is to have a framework that enables mutual trust. And a key element of that is standardizing test certificates. Number three, finally, digital travel credential. This enables travelers with an e-passport to make their phone into a digital passport. That will help with contactless processes, which have been recommended by ICAO cards. And they will enable the secure matching of certificates to travelers. As the standard exists, the challenge here is implementation. This standard and the principle that I described earlier could be the foundation for setting the need benchmark for an industry restart. And we will be engaging with governments as partners in laying the needed plans. Even though the recovery is stalled, there is really no time to lose. The social and economic suffering that this crisis is causing is severe. As solutions become available, we want to be ready to implement them as fast as we can, of course, when the epidemiologic situation allows. It was easy for governments to shut off their countries with unilateral actions, but re-establishing global connectivity needs cooperation. IATA is engaged with the standard-setting process. We are moving forward quickly with the IATA Travel Pass, and we aim to be good partners for governments to establish workable restart plans based on global standards. And our history of partnering with governments to make air travel the safest form of long-distance transport gives us a model to work from and the confidence that we can be successful. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexandre. Also, thank you, Nick. I see we've got a few questions in the queue. I'll just kick off the question and answer session with one request for a precision from Nick. You mentioned that the travel app, the travel pass, I should say, would benefit from SDK app integration. As I understand, that means it integrates into apps that airlines might have. But maybe, Nick, do you want to explain that a little bit more?
I think that's about as simple as it gets, Tony. It is it allows for the app to be placed under the airline's app itself. So if you download, as an example, name an airline and you have their app, you're using it for your normal processes, whether that's check-in, checking flight status, etc. Or this would just simply be embedded in that app with the same functionality. But just simply available through their app versus having to download separately the app on its own merits. So it's really about making it more simpler in terms of the airlines themselves and their processes, and they're the ones that are front facing in terms of the consumer.
Okay, super. Thanks, Nick. We have a whole lot of questions actually in the queue, so we'll try and get to them in order. First question comes to us from Germany, and the German government has made some statements saying that they will shut down air traffic to a minimum in order to fight against new variants. The question is, what does IATA think about this development, and what impact will it have on the industry? Alexandre, did you want to handle that?
We are pretty worried to see that governments are ready to shut down the traffic. So we are not supportive of a shutdown of traffic. Well,
Yeah.
I cannot say something else.
Yeah, we're then, Tony, seeing this not just Germany. Unfortunately, this is a widespread movement globally. I see it here every day. It's in the media in Canada, in the US, in the UK, and more. And as IATA, not really in a position to ask or define how countries should manage their border, but we've maintained for a long time that there's a safe way to do this, and there is a way to manage the international traffic and not make it the scapegoat that it's being portrayed as at the moment. However, governments are going to do what governments want to do. We are suggesting that we are ready to have a discussion about a way forward, roadmaps, timelines. When will governments be ready to start having a meaningful discussion about opening borders? And when that's ready, we're waiting for that opportunity for that to take place.
Okay, super. Thanks, Nick and Alexandre. And Nick, maybe if I could just push that a little bit. When you say timelines, I suppose you're talking about things like when certain percentage of the population are vaccinated, or certain developments in the epidemiological situation. Is that correct?
Exactly, and actually embracing the testing technology that exists today and implementing it in a process where vaccinations simply aren't going to reach the levels that one would expect. It's a first world problem when you see that Europe and North America and some other lucky places will be in a position much faster than everywhere else. So we can't be simply reliant on the vaccines to be the enabler, but certainly there has to be some level of metrics, and we need some leadership from the World Health Organization and ICAO on this in order to be able to get states to agree upon a process and a mechanism and a trigger that allows for things to start to restart. We can't continue to operate like this is death by 1,000 cuts. And the other part of that question that from the journalist in Germany was, what are the impacts of this? Well, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what the burning of cash is happening, and it's only a matter of time before we start to see bigger issues, and that would be loss of operations, loss of airlines, loss of schedule, increased costs. I mean, the list and the other side of this and the impacts are enormous.
Great. Thanks very much, Nick. We have a question talking about a proposal that was made by Greece last week, which was for the recognition that vaccinated persons should not be subject to travel restrictions. And the questioner asks, how concerned are we that this will not be universally accepted by governments?
I can jump in on that if you wish, Tony, and then I'm sure Alexandre has more to say. But in terms of this, our position is that should be and should be the case. However, again, we're not a medical body, and we can say whatever we want. What we do need is for the World Health Organization and to come out and say the same thing, so that it becomes a universal acceptance that once you're vaccinated, you should not have to go through any of these hoops that would be required if you were not. And so that's our position, and we are continuing to have discussions and suggesting and pushing and wanting for a global recognized group like the World Health Organization to suggest that. And then we would begin to see that rolled out more systematically. By and large, Greece is not the only country that feels this way. We've seen that, as the most recent announcement from the CDC in the US, they also recognize the vaccine as being an enabler for travel and not requiring additional measures. But they've also taken one more step in the US that others have not yet, and that is those that have had COVID also are not subjected to additional testing or quarantines either, which is also something that we believe should be in place as we move forward as well.
Great, thanks, Nick. We have a question from Europe asking how our travel pass discussions are being received by the European Union and by individual European governments. Nick, I guess that one's for you as well.
Well, recognized and widely accepted, and conversations continue. So we've had conversations with the EU directly, the EC, the IATA. We have also had a number of discussions directly with individual governments, but also the airlines in those jurisdictions, because it really is a requirement for not only any of these pilots, as an example that I'd highlighted, the ones that are underway and the ones that are being contemplated to be scheduled later in the month of February into March and onward, will require that government involvement as well as the airline involvement. So it is widely recognized. It is growing in terms of interest and pace, and so I think right now I would say that the appetite is good, and the fact that we're leveraging off existing systems, something governments are very comfortable with in terms of thematic, and allowing thematic to be a trusted source of information when it comes to facilitation around visa requirements and passport requirements, etc. This is just a sort of an extension to that, which makes those discussions a little bit easier with the government in terms of trusting the source, trusting the data, and trusting the process.
Great, thanks, Nick. And just for journalists that may not be familiar with thematic, that's the system that most airlines use to determine whether a traveler meets the entry requirements for countries. So it's a very well-established global system. We have a question from the US, and the questioner says, how will the travel pass work in environments where currently vaccinations are being delivered to people, but the vaccination itself is being recorded in paper without a centralized database or sort of an IT infrastructure behind that. The question is, how do you then digitize that in order to utilize the IATA Travel Pass? Nick, I guess that's for you as well.
And that's a little bit of a cumbersome question. I'm not a techie. But in terms of the initial stages, because of the fact that there's many that have been vaccinated and there's many that have received tests, there is no standard in place. There will have to be a period of time where the ability to unload the data, paper data, whether that's through scanning, through PDF files, through web-based solutions, that's going to be necessary, and it's built to be able to accept multiple formats in multiple languages, and just for simple fact that that's just the way it is. Moving forward, as we suggested, we do need to see the globe accept the digital standards that are out there. We are anticipating the ones and the key elements on what testing, digital testing certificate would look like from ICAO in the coming weeks. We're also expecting the same in terms of vaccination requirements from a digital perspective from the World Health Organization in the coming weeks. But in the interim, we will need to have a process to upload what's been made available to consumers today. And that's not perfect, but it is better than the solution that's out there today, which is basically paper-based, and there is no verification at all in the process, which I've mentioned is very manual in nature and wrought with risk.
Great, thanks very much, Nick. We have a question for Alexandre, and also I think we have Brian Pierce, our chief economist, on the line, so he might want to jump in as well. But the question asks, what do you think is, first off, has the industry outlook for recovery darkened because of the recent tightening of boarding restrictions, or do you see this as short term? And is it primarily Europe or global? And then the second part of that question would be, do we believe that the summer season in the Northern Hemisphere is under threat as a result of actions we've seen in recent weeks?
Shall I jump in first? Thank you. Good question. I think the short-term outlook has certainly darkened. With the increase in travel restrictions, not just in Europe, and obviously the rise in coronavirus cases, not just in Europe. The critical time will be the summer season, because that is when airlines make most of their money. This is a seasonally low time of year for travel. The vaccine should make all the difference. So the second half of the year should be and feel very different to what it's feeling like now. So we're hoping that this is the dark before the dawn. But it really depends on governments cooperating and implementing the sort of tools that Nick has been presenting today.
Okay, thanks very much, Brian. Alexandre, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No.
Okay, great. We have a very quick question concerning the advisory group for the IATA Travel Pass. The questioner asks, why are there no U.S. carriers in the advisory group?
I'll put this, there is a U.S. carrier, they're the United Airlines, and there's a Canadian carrier there, Air Canada.
Okay, great. Yes, I guess we missed that out on the slide, but thank you for the clarification. We have a question from Hong Kong, where the government there is said to be considering a 14-day crew quarantine. And the questioner asks, what will the impact of that be for Hong Kong, and how does IATA feel about that, or what discussions are we having with the Hong Kong government? Alexandre, did you want to take that one?
So we understand that Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government, has to balance, the various options in combating COVID-19. But asking for a 14-day quarantine for Hong Kong-based air crew will reduce, flight at a time where aviation connectivity is absolutely critical to combat the pandemic as well as to support the economy. So we are also a bit worried about this potential new measure for the crew in Hong Kong, and particularly because the Hong Kong aviation sector is already fragile due to COVID-19. What we are asking is that the air crew are considered as essential workers and that they should be number one to be vaccinated.
Great.
Our top priority.
Great. Thanks very much, Alexandre. We have another question going back to the vaccination certificates. And the questioner says, we're in month 14 of the pandemic. Why are we only now trying to develop a standard? I think that's probably the new part of the question. So, Nick, is there any background you can share on that?
Well, yeah, there is. That question's better served to ask the World Health Organization. We have been suggesting this for months. I guess, the pandemic has been around for this long, but it could also be facetious to say the vaccine isn't. It might sound like we've had 10 months to build it, but you can't build anything on something you don't know. But having said that, now is the time, and I mentioned in the presentation, the World Health Organization needs a fire lit underneath it to get this done sooner rather than later. Arguably could have been done by now, but these processes take time and they need governments to agree upon it. But we are, and on the same token, we are confident that they will have something agreed upon in the coming weeks. But then it takes governments to adopt them. So there's no guarantee that every government is going to adopt the standard right away. So we need to be flexible, and that's unfortunate. We would love it to be the other way, just like the reporter who asked the question. But we have to be patient. We need to have workarounds, and we need to push governments to adopt the digital certificates and standards once they've been agreed upon. But it's absolutely correct to suggest it's taking too long.
Okay. Thanks very much. We have another question picking up on some of your comments about fraudulent paper certifications. The questioner asks, is it that passengers are attempting to board by presenting false certificates? And how widespread is that? I guess that's for you, Nick.
It is, it's doctored. There's multiple examples, but primarily it's doctored results, fake results. It is not as widespread as as one would think. It's happening though, and it happened before COVID with the yellow fever cards. So this is nothing really overly new to the industry, but it is something that we anticipate can become a much larger issue post-COVID and when we're into a meaningful restart, simply because the requirements that we're anticipating governments are going to ask for will far outpace the requirements that yellow fever cards had needed. So it's an issue that we're trying to prevent, although there are some examples out there today where it is happening.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. We have a question about smart vaccine certificates. And the questioner challenges us by saying, right now it seems like there isn't any consensus around smart vaccine certificates. It seems to be very slow. Is that a correct interpretation? And do we see any light at the end of the tunnel for this, particularly with respect to Europe?
Yeah, I guess we could spend an entire day, and again, we're not a political organization or a trade association, but there could be, there's not only around the vaccination certifications themselves, but even just getting vaccinated. So we need to be prepared for both. And yeah, the way the journalists have depicted it is correct. And so we are anticipating that some countries will and some countries may not, and eventually they all may. We're not sure, but we need to be prepared for the inevitable that we're going to have perhaps a lack of harmony at the beginning. And eventually, as we do for most everything that it happens in this industry, whether it's safety or otherwise, we will be pushing for standard adoption, harmonization, and interoperability, which is almost the bingo buzzwords for us and everything that we push for. And this will be no different.
Okay. And just a clarification, Nick, I suppose even if there are multiple standards out there, it's not ideal, but we can still accommodate those within the framework of what's being built for the IATA Travel Pass?
None of it is ideal. I mean, the industry is resilient. We're the most resilient industry in the planet. And even if we were forced to do manual, we would do it. And we will find ways to do it and be creative. And the goal is global harmonization. We need to be prepared for the fact that we're not going to start that way.
Great. Thanks. I have another question asking, are we in talks with other modes of transport with respect to the travel pass, particularly road and rail?
There have been some limited conversations, but to be quite honest, this is an industry-led. Our job is to make sure that we have something that works for aviation. And so that's where all of our focus is. We haven't finalized the development of this tool, so that needs to happen. And we also need to make sure that it fits into the aviation and airline experience and requirements, and that needs to be focused upon. And then we will look at chasing other shiny objects. We have been approached by folks like Airbnb, some concert organizers, etc. But right now, that's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is making sure that this stands up to the requirements of our industry.
Okay, thanks, Nick. We have a question which says the IATA Travel Pass isn't the only thing that's out there. There are others that are promoting similar types of programs. The questioner asks, do we expect that the IATA Travel Pass will be universally used by airlines, or do we see this as being a competitive market?
Well, I think it's a complementary market, not a competitive market. We're not trying to corner anything, nor are we trying to commercialize this. This is an enabler and a tool to help facilitate movement once governments begin to start opening up their borders. It is open source. It is not designed to be proprietary. It is not designed to be the only game in town. It is modularly built for that reason as well. The only caveat being our prioritization in terms of integration will be on the airlines that have wanted to integrate it fully at the beginning. And that's just logical, But no, we will be open to. We won't be the only game in town, but we certainly hope that what we have designed would be what would be leveraged elsewhere. So we have some kind of consistency in the passenger journey, and that would facilitate that. So no, it is open. It's open.
Okay. Thank you. We have a question on the cost of the travel pass. Will there be a cost to governments or users for using it?
No.
So I suppose the question would be, how is it being funded then?
Well, I'm not thinking of it. It would be between the airline and us.
Okay, great. So we have a further clarification on how the app exists. So is it the vision that there will be a standalone IATA Travel Pass app, as well as IATA Travel Pass integrated into some airlines' own travel apps? And what does that mean for the consumer? How will they know which one to use, or will they all be sort of interoperable with each other? Any advice on that, Nick?
The way it's been described is the way we'll envision it. Some airlines, not every airline is created equally either. I mean, as we know, where our membership is diverse, and from very small to medium-sized carriers to the much larger ones, and anticipate that there will be variants, but they would be interoperable. So if a consumer decided to download the IATA Travel Pass and utilize that, it would still work regardless of whether they had the app of the airline, and vice versa.
Right. Okay. See, another question for you, I think, Nick. You're in the hot seat today. We have a question a little bit outside of the COVID situation, but asking about our cargo operations, and specifically how close are we to finding a replacement for the head of cargo?
Interesting. Cargo is performing well. I don't think there's any surprises there. It's the latest statistics that Brian and team had communicated would indicate where that is in terms of capacity, and so everything on the cargo side is performing well in my mind. We have a regular catch up with our cargo advisory group, and the airlines have not raised any significant issues at the moment, and even in terms of vaccination movement, which is no small feat. And I think we're about to release, or have released our second version of the guidance documentation on transport of vaccines, which has been the only reference at the moment, and that's been very successful. So good there. In terms of replacement for the position, I'm managing it directly myself right now at the moment. So the team reports to me, and I'm capable of managing cargo. But in the interim, we are in interview stages. We should have an announcement to make within the next 6 weeks or so, with some extremely capable next step individuals to bring cargo to a new level.
Okay. We have a question about the situation in Israel. And it says that there's a large percentage of its population has already been vaccinated. How has that impacted the travel situation in Israel?
Silence. Nobody wants to take that.
Yeah. As I understand, the priority of governments is still dealing with the new variant. So I think comparing what's going on with respect to the number of vaccinations and the ability to travel, the preoccupation is probably more on the new variant than on getting people to use their vaccinated status as an ability to travel. But I don't know, Nick or Alexandre, did you have anything to add to that?
We did.
I understood that the government has closed the airports and has stopped all travels for 1 week. So the impact on vaccination in Israel and on travel is disconnected from the from the travel restrictions.
Yep.
We are in discussions, though, Tony, with the Israelis beyond the current situation that you depicted on dealing with the variant. But our regional team have had discussions with them as early as today, and around how standards of digital vaccination certificates could work, and specific discussions around the travel pass, and so that those discussions are ongoing.
Great, thanks very much. I have a question asking if we're concerned that there could be a discrimination in the ability to travel because some people may not ever be able to be vaccinated for various health concerns, or are unable to get vaccinated because of the unavailability of vaccines. How concerned are we about that?
The first question about those that are for medical reasons can't take the vaccine, we are contemplating that in version or variant 3 of the pass itself, because we will need to have exception-based protocols for situations like that. So that is being contemplated, so that a consumer can also enjoy the improved process and not have to go through some extra steps as a result of not having a vaccine because there are of medical requirements. And then, that's why testing would also be required for those that can't have vaccines. And subsequently, when governments are to at that magic number or tipping point in terms of vaccinations in their own country, we anticipate that some of these restrictions will be removed. And I don't think as an organization or as an industry we're anticipating that it goes on infinitum, that it does come to an end. But for sure, we would be concerned if situations arise where people are being left out of travel as a result of current government policy, and we would be dealing with those on a case-by-case basis should they arise.
Okay, thanks, Nick. We have a question, I think, for Brian. You mentioned that the first half of the year will be very difficult for airlines. Will it be so difficult that we need to review or revise our revenue expectations or outlook for the industry? And secondly, the questioner notes that ACI Europe has already taken this step of reevaluation.
Well, we started off with a very low conservative forecast for the recovery of air travel anyway. In our forecast, which we actually released in October, we were expecting the average level of travel in 2021 to be only 50% of 2019 levels. So I think it's a matter of other forecasts sort of catching up with us. However, I think that what we've also seen, though, is that airlines have been getting very low yields on passengers, partly because they've been pricing to try to stimulate demand passengers on the aircraft. So revenues have been worse than the passengers' situation. So we'll be looking at that closely when we come to update our outlook on cash burn, which is clearly going to be very significant in the first part of this year, but we'll be releasing some more details on that in coming weeks.
Okay. And then I guess as a follow-up to that, we had a question which was asking about airline failures. We didn't see some of the dire predictions that were made in 2020 come through, but with this turn for the worse, are we expecting that we could see more airline failures in 2021?
Well, I mean, the industry, we reckon, lost $118 billion just on its P&L account. It had to take on a lot of debt. The reason we didn't see the failures, and we reckon there have been 35, 40 or so airlines that have either failed or restructured under bankruptcy protections. That's quite a small number. And the reason being is, of course, that governments have stepped in. We've been advocating for the financial support for airlines, and indeed governments have stepped in and provided, according to our last count, almost $200 billion of cash. So that has kept the industry on life support. But we're facing a really challenging first half of the year before the vaccines really start to make a difference to travel demand. The situation is getting worse. So airlines' cash burn will be getting worse in the next few months. And I think we will need, many airlines have been able to raise a lot of cash, not just from government aid, but from borrowing in the capital markets. But, if the summer season is endangered, there'll be a clear need for more cash to keep airlines alive.
Okay. And maybe this is a question for Alexandre. Does that mean asking governments to take an even greater role in the industry's recovery, or keeping the industry afloat, I guess?
It means that governments should continue their support and their commitment and their involvement in helping the industry to recover. And we for the next 6 to 8 months, we desperately need government support by any means: cost reduction, tax relief, cash injection, subsidies, everything.
Okay. Yeah, indeed, the situation remains very severe. We have another question asking if we're concerned that with respect to the distribution of vaccines, so one part of the world seems to be getting them, parts of the world that may not have access to vaccines. Are we concerned that we could end up with sort of a two-speed recovery, or that some of these countries that are unable to get vaccinations will keep their borders closed for much longer, and again, sort of fueling that idea of a two-stage or two-speed recovery?
I mean, that is what we've been expecting. I think that was apparent, late last year, that it would be the developed economies that were able to buy and vaccinate to a significant degree. And if you look at the specialist medical companies that are projecting vaccination rates and the point at which herd immunity will be reached, I think it is pretty clear that will be in the developed economies, in North America and Europe, a few other places, hopefully by the summer or the third quarter of this year. But in many of the developing countries, that's going to be next year or later. So there almost certainly will be a two-speed recovery.
Okay. And we're running a little short on time, but I think we can probably make 2 more questions. So one question with respect to IATA Travel Pass again. And the question is asking, essentially, where does the data for approved testing centers come from? Is it that governments get to make those decisions and travelers can choose amongst those options, or can travelers choose and governments approve? Or Nick, maybe you can take us through how that system would work?
Well, it's a little bit of both. Right now, some countries have taken the step of identifying the locations that are acceptable, and that list continues to grow. And in other cases, we will be sourcing it through our own network of labs that we are building upon, with partnerships through some of the larger corporations in the world that have testing and laboratory facilities globally, and then those that will be developed locally as well, to eventually create a list. But ultimately, the government itself has the final say in terms of what is a registered and required and recognized laboratory, but we have the ability to be able to do that through simple search functions and utilizing our regional teams to help build that, and with partnerships through, as I've mentioned. So it is a combination of the two at the moment. Eventually, once that full list, it'll just be a maintaining of the list and taking some off and placing some back on that meet the certain criteria that they have been established by the local governments.
Okay. A question maybe for Brian. We've seen Australia say it's likely to keep its borders closed through the year. China also seems unlikely to lift its restrictions anytime soon. With respect to long-haul intercontinental flights, when are we seeing a potential return to 2019 levels?
I think it's we're talking about years rather than months, unfortunately. And it's partly related to the two-speed vaccination that was asked earlier, because governments are going to have to open up their borders. It's the travel restrictions that is the determining factor here, and we think that it's going to be. I mean, clearly, domestic travel is recovering first. It's fully recovered in some markets. Clearly, there is a willingness and a desire for people to fly, and shorter haul travel is most likely as governments can trust in partners at the other end of countries. But I think the long haul markets will be the last to recover, and I think we're talking, 2 to 3 years here before we get back to 2019 levels.
Okay. And I guess that also just emphasizes also how important testing will be in the interim to help make up for vaccine shortfalls.
Absolutely. I mean, there are ways that governments can speed up this recovery. We're taking a fairly conservative process here, and obviously the use of testing is one way to speed that process up.
Okay. And then maybe the last question today will go to a completely different topic than COVID. And maybe this one's for you, Alexandre. Europe recently gave the green light to the 737 MAX. Does IATA have any reaction to this development? And then I suppose in terms of the overall process for the recertification of the aircraft?
No, we have worked closely with the airline, the aircraft manufacturer, and the agencies that are in charge of certifying or recertifying, the 737 MAX. The process has been followed very closely. Improvements have been made. Retrofit has been done. The condition, to relaunch or to have the aircraft that were grounded to fly again has been strictly defined and strictly met. So we approved what has been done. Should be done seriously.
And passengers should have confidence in the aircraft. All right. I think that brings us pretty much to, if not a little bit beyond the hour. So thank you, everybody, for joining us again for this briefing.